everyone, and welcome to the Podcast by Army podcast, where we talk about BTS, Army, fandom, and research. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Ringland and
Jhertau Her, a university researcher.
And today we're going to talk about the Army fandom, what it looks like.
And how it's structured.
Yeah. Okay.
All you, Kate.
Yeah, so I thought it'd be interesting today to talk about some of the ways that Army moves and operates, and I come to you all with actual research. Shocking. So this is from a human-computer interaction conference called CHI, and this paper is from 2021, and it is by, let me get this all out there, this is by Park et al., say, and I'm happy to drop the link to this in the description. But anyway, the reason we're starting with this is it actually does a really nice job. So this was a survey paper that conducted a survey, and I'll give the details in a second. But the broad strokes is it's talking about the Match a Million hashtag Black Lives Matter donation project and some of the reactions by Army that kind of came after that project. But the reason I love this paper is it does a really nice job of giving a look at the way in which Army views itself and the way that Army structures itself. So this was a survey. This was primarily conducted through Twitter using one of our big Army research accounts, which is no longer active. And at the time, this account had 60,000 followers. And so this was tweeted out to them, and then it snowballed from there. And the total responses here, so this was in mid-August in 2020. And so just to be clear, this came from 273 responses. So this was like people who matched the criteria and everything and filled out the survey. The final number was 273 responses. So not a ton of people in terms of surveying all of Army, which we can unpack in a minute. But some of the results that came from this I thought were super interesting. So the paper talks about how Army is this like a flat structure. We don't have a strict hierarchy like you would have in another kind of organization, right? And anyone who spends time in an Army knows this. But so hopefully this resonates. But talks about how there's not like a leadership per se, except for BTS, obviously. And even then, it's like they're not exactly steering the ship in any meaningful way. And the other kind of interesting thing that kind of came out of this was talking about how Army has different poles or pillars. So like these accounts that kind of gather a lot of people around them, and they tend to act in a kind of leadership position. But again, it's really loose, and how that happens is pretty fluid. But you can imagine, so like the translators get a lot of people that kind of gather around them, and they become these big spokes or hubs in the community. But again, it's still fairly flat, and who those people are shifts and changes over time. And this is, I'm not flying away from the paper and just talking about my own experiences, but we can see who those pillars are and who the big people are in the fandom shifts over time. And what I think about this interesting about this research is how they laid out some of these patterns of organization that don't look like your typical organization. Anyway, so I thought that would be a good place for us to start in talking about what does Army look like. So we can see that there's a lot of these kind of big hubs of people, but who those people are shifts and changes over time. So being like, just from our own experience, we can see who the leaders are, who the big names are. Those change over time, and they shift depending on who is active. Because right, for the last 18 months, certain accounts that used to be our big hubs have gone dark because people leave, people get canceled, and so on. Anyway, so we can see these kind of hubs that people organize around, but again, it's still fairly flat. I think from our own perspectives, we can talk a lot about how, at least the way I'm feeling, is some of this is still very true, given the last several months of changes happening in the community. We still have big hubs, we still have big kind of quote unquote bigger accounts that people kind of circle around. But the flatness actually to me has become a lot clearer, because I have felt like, because especially within the sub community that I am now oriented around, we have people who are much more vocal, and those people tend to steer conversations. But I feel like hierarchically we're a lot flatter. We don't have 100K follower account that's like steering us, right? We have people with less than 10K followers, people with less than 5K followers who are still loud and getting a lot of airtime in the community. And I actually think that's a good thing for us as our sub community. We could speak to what the other side is doing if we wanted to. But anyway, I'll leave it there and you can step in.
Yeah, I feel like with Army, okay, Army is like the other girls. Let's just make it very clear. All fandoms operate in this type of way where there's this thing called a big name fan. It's called a BNF. It's a term that's really common in other fandom spaces. Army doesn't use it enough, in my opinion. A big name fan is basically like a fan who's like a fan influencer. They're popular because they're a fan of something. So that's what happens with a lot of these big accounts. And inappropriately, I think a lot of them think they wield more power than they actually do. And because of that, a lot of armies who are smaller accounts or may not like have that type of following incorrectly think that they don't have the power to
Right.
make change or to say something meaningful in the space. Which is there's something there about the destruction of community or like individual power. And something really prominent in advocacy spaces is the power of the individual and then the collective. So collectively, like the collective is always stronger than the individual. But the individual has to be the one to be like, no, I don't accept this anymore.
Right.
And it's the accumulation of all those individuals that forms the collective. And sometimes on Army Twitter, I think many people feel isolated, where they think, oh, I'm the only person saying this thing. And because I'm the only person saying this thing, I can't participate in the collective. But no, you can go make your own collective.
Right.
And even if that collective is like you and one other person, that's still stronger than one.
Right.
And I don't know, there's some commentary to be had here about the modern era and like the destruction of community and the attempt to like disempower people instead of empowering them. Because I even remember even before 2024 and 2023 and like what we're doing now with Palestine, I've always said on Army Twitter, even if you tweet something and no one likes it, no one retweets it, there's not that many views, you saying something and saying it very clearly can convince one person.
Yeah.
And that convincing of one person leads to convincing of more people. And it's all about that domino effect. And people, you don't see it clearly. A lot of times people feel really discouraged because they don't see the effect of their own words and the impact of their own actions very clearly sometimes. But there's power in dissenting and power in being strong with your own opinions, your own morals, and knowing those really clearly. Especially right now on Army Twitter, there's a lot of people, anti-boycotters, Zionist compliant people who are trying to disempower people who are boycotting and who are pro-Palestine. But really, people who are on our side and who we are talking to, we hold power in the fact that we choose to dissent even though we face harassment from those other people. Dissenting is important, and being strong in that dissent is important. That's why whenever politicians don't speak up until it's easy to speak up, get a lot of flack, because it's 10 times more powerful to speak up when it's hard than to speak up when it's easy. Oftentimes, if you're involved in advocacy work, even just on Army Twitter, but not even just on Army Twitter, in person as well. I'm involved in advocacy work on my university campus, and I get to see the fruits of that labor very clearly with how even though the university has done all these things against pro-Palestinian students, there's still power in how so many students now see clearly how corrupt the university is. And now students empowered, they can now gather and organize and fight against that system. But people don't see that till way after the fact. So when you're in the moment, when you're in it, you can't see it. Because you don't see it, a lot of times you don't feel empowered to be involved.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that yes, all of that, and I think in particular with the fact that we have such a flat hierarchy in terms of our structure, you might be the person who's getting 0 likes and 10 views today, but tomorrow you could be somebody who has a lot of views and has some actual voice in the community. I think that there's something in that if you just keep talking and you just keep making your noise, eventually people will hear you and eventually people will find you. And I think to speak to the larger piece of this is a lesson, again, that we're not just learning here in Army spaces, we're seeing it on campus, we're seeing it across our cities, we're seeing it in all these different spaces. I'm in an HCI for Justice for Palestine movement where we're trying to get movement across our conferences. This is something that it's bigger than Army, and I'll say that we have history. We have, even if it feels like right now I feel voiceless, or right now I feel disempowered, or all I feel like is every time I speak up I get harassed, or whatever the feeling is. We have historical accounts of people who have been through this before and have come out on the other side victorious. And we have historical account, just looking at just the university protest, for example, we have historical accounts of play by play, these exact same things happening. And in the end, the people who were protesting ended up on the right side of history and getting what they wanted. And so these are things that, you know, this isn't just, oh, just keep fighting, hopefully we don't die. It's no, we are going to win eventually if we keep using our voices. So anyway, that was a digression, but I think that there is something really interesting in the way, especially in these online spaces where the algorithm business, whatever aside, I think there's a really interesting egalitarian effect of having kind of this flatness in the organization of our community. I feel like there's something in, I just commented on somebody's post today about, if you have a large following, yes, you have more responsibility to the community. If you are posting disinformation to your 28,000 followers, that is bad. You should not be doing that. That is not good for your community. It's not healthy. It's not safe. So yes, if you've amassed a following, you should definitely be using your voice to be good for your community, to be better for the world. But also, if you don't have a huge following, if you only have 10 followers, that's still 10 people in the world that you are communicating with and that decided your voice was important enough to listen to. So anyway, soapbox done.
No, but that's true. Too, I feel like we live in a world that simultaneously empowers us, but also disempowers our own voices, where so easily you can just post something online and people can see it and people can hear you and hear what you're saying. But also, a lot of that gets drowned out by just all the stuff online that exists. Which is why I think, even though we talk a lot about online organizing, sometimes you need to reach out to like your in-person community too. Like the friends and family you have around you. Just talking about Palestine with your family, that's meaningful. There's little ways you can resist. All forms of resistance are valid. Just saying. By the way, it's not like any form of resistance is better than the other. I wonder. Anyway.
There's going to be a lot of subtext in this episode, I'm feeling.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of subtext. Yeah. And with us talking about big accounts and like the structure of Army, I wanted to talk about like the individual account as well. So like the fan account versus personal account argument, where it's okay, personal Army Twitter. They have a Twitter. They have BTS member as their profile picture. They have a little 7 in the display name. That person, it's like a fan account, right? But a lot of people argue because it's a fan account, it's not a personal account. So you should only post about fan-related things. And I think this belief that a lot of people hold, that's creating a lot of tension with us talking about Palestine on the timeline. Because people are like, oh, I've only come here to talk about BTS. This is not my personal account. On my personal account, I talk about Palestine. I personally donate. I don't need to talk about my donations on this fan account because it's a fan account. And I'm only focused on being a fan here, which I think is so interesting because I wonder which group of people can actually detach from their own identity and not have their identity paint everything they see in their life and also influence everything they see in their life. That's really interesting.
There's a connection there, I'm sure, that you are making to certain groups of people.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think about that, Kate? Like fan account versus personal account?
Okay. So, as someone who first stepped into Army Twitter in the very beginning of 2021, as somebody who had already seen the things that Army were selling as this is what Army is. So we're talking about the Black Lives Matter donation. We're talking about all the K-pop disruption of the Trump election, all that stuff. So I stepped into Army Twitter going, okay, I study online communities. I like this community. I really love BTS. I see the potential here for reaching a lot of people and changing the world for the better. That was the attitude that I walked into Army Twitter with. And that's not just, that didn't come out of nowhere. That was what was sold to me by Army, right? That's what Army claimed to be about. And so it's interesting retrospectively here in 2024 to look back at that and go, it's really weird how we flipped the narrative on its head. And I will say that I also am I have a strange experience on Army Twitter, particularly because I was never anonymous. So people know who I am. Like, they know my real name. They know where I work. I'm not safely anonymous and comfortably anonymous in a way that a lot of people are, right? And I don't have opinions one way or another whether I totally understand why people are anonymous on their fan account. That's fine. But being anonymous on your fan account does not necessarily mean you should be separating all your personal identity from your fan account. That seems very strange to me. And you're still bringing your baggage, you're still bringing your identity with you. It's just you're choosing what people see and you're choosing how people perceive you. You're creating a persona of yourself in your fan account. But just because you're doing that doesn't mean you shouldn't also be doing the good things in the world that we purportedly were supposed to be here doing anyway. That was literally sold to me in 2021, that we're here to do good in the world. And if we all of a sudden aren't allowed to do that anymore because you in particular don't like Palestine and are pro-Zionist, then I can't help you.
It's almost like the entire time it was performative.
That's where I am sitting here going, what is left? What is left of this fandom if we're not doing the things we claimed to be doing in 2021? Have been given, and again, this is something I literally just said, that if you have 28,000 followers, 60,000 followers, 120,000 followers, 10 followers, if you are able to reach people and do good in the world, then why aren't you doing that? We have been given a lot of power by BTS. We should be leveraging that. And I have felt that way since joining this fandom. And so immediately what I did, I got on my account, I started doing science communication and trying to explain to people what research was. I was in there working with communities and fan bases. I created a whole account just for Disabled Army. You can't tell me that all of that, we're not supposed to do any of that? Having feelings about this. Apparently, this is what was sold to me. This is what we all agreed was good community, and I think it's really disingenuous to be like, this is no longer my problem because of what exactly. Like, well,
yeah, it's interesting to me because you were sold that when you first came into Army, but even that was somewhat of a lie.
No, that's the thing. That is, I think, going to be the thing I perhaps remember most is like now looking back going, wow, people were just lying to me about this. It's one of those things, like every community does this. They create narratives, they reinvent themselves, they like have this kind of picture perfect version they want to sell to the world. That's what communities do, okay. But when the curtain has been pulled back in these last few months, and when a lot of the historical kind of lies are now surfacing, it wasn't really like that. It was actually more like this, with lots more tensions and racism and awfulness. It's okay, good to know, but we know that now, so maybe we should be better now.
This is exactly along the same vein of what I was talking about earlier, where people are choosing comfort and choosing complicity right now because they can't see the future. They can't imagine a better world. They can't imagine a world without Zionism because we see this often from the Zionist compliant side, where they talk about, oh, every industry has Zionists in it. We can't fight it off. We can't do anything about it. So why should we? When it's like, we can imagine a world without Zionism. We are capable of doing that. And then also achieving that. And I think people just aren't, because they're not able to conceptualize a world without it, they think they should just be complicit now. And they should just be fine with it now. Because nothing will ever change. That's a loser mindset.
It is, though. It is. Because it's, if we can't imagine the world being a better place, then what are we all doing here? What's the point?
I think it's really sad to even think that nothing can change. Because, okay, the fact that there's so many, I'm just going to say it outright, so many women and even people of color who are against pro-Palestinian people and Palestinian people themselves, you siding with the oppressor will not save you from oppression.
White women are especially susceptible to this, where we like hold up our oppressors because we think we'll get a better deal in the end, when in reality, we all just continue being oppressed.
It's almost like the oppressors were using you in order to continue oppressing people. So that's why you have to dissent and not be complicit with the oppressors. It's really interesting because like you talk about like how white women do this, but I see this a lot in like Asian women as well, where a lot of times Asian women will be complicit with the patriarchy or even whiteness and won't stand up and do anything. Because we're seeing right now how in politics, there's a lot of people of color, a lot of times Asian women, who become like these figures in political spaces where they're like, oh, that's like the token person of color. But that person of color doesn't actually represent the people at all. That's why I feel really uncomfortable, like an Asian woman myself. I feel really uncomfortable in advocacy spaces or political spaces where I am the only person of color. Because I'm like, okay, I don't represent like a lot of people's experiences. My background is not going to support the gaps here. So we need to bring more people in, bring more chairs to the table, build a bigger table, because I am not enough right here, right now.
It's like when folks bring me in to committees and stuff and we're like, oh, good, we have disability covered now. I am the end all be all of all disability conversations. I'm sorry, but that is so untrue, horrifyingly untrue.
Didn't you know, Kate, you represent all disabled people now?
Oh gosh, yeah.
You're doing great. Yeah, and oh, as we're talking about representation as well, with Army, we were talking about this before we started recording, but often you talked about how you like talk to someone about quantitative data.
Oh yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, no, there was an interesting exchange that I had in my comments. Someone was asking, because so to back up, I do mainly qualitative research, which means, and it's largely ethnographic, which means I'm doing a lot of observations, which means observing and taking notes about it. I do a lot of interviews, I ask questions and I get their stories. I do surveys, but I mostly care about the qualitative, open-ended questions where people are just giving me novels of cool information and stories that they have to tell. So I was posting about something, I don't remember what now, but somebody asked about my research and asked about it being qualitative, and it devolved into this quant versus qual conversation. This is like an age-old question in research in general, is like the qual versus quant conversation, and often it falls apart into qual tends to be viewed as very biased and it's not generalizable, so what's the use of it, and what can we really learn from qual? And then the quant people are very like, here's my numbers, and very has pretty graphs, but like, what can we actually glean from this information? Like, the reality of research is you have to have both, right? You have to have the qualitative to actually make meaning of the quantitative, and the quantitative really needs the qualitative to have that meaning. Anyway, so it's a conversation between the different research styles. So it's a whole thing. Anyway, so there was a thing in my comments about the quant versus qual because they had mostly seen quantitative research, because that's what, when people think of science, they think of the scientific method, which is one way of doing research. And anyway, I don't do that. I was explaining that I do ethnographic work and I really need to have these stories and have this rich qualitative data that actually allows us to know what's going on in these spaces, right? The problem being that this isn't super generalizable. We don't get a full picture of Army, but let's be real, we're never going to have a full picture of Army. We're never going to have, at least from one researcher, right? We're never going to have a complete picture of Army. There are too many of us. We're too diverse for that ever to be real. So the way I approach my work is I am like, no, I'm not talking about all of Army. I've never claimed to talk about all of Army. I'm talking about my subcommunity with my subgroup of people that I interact with and that I get visualization into. And that's what I'm talking about. And some of that tracks into larger fandom communities and some of that doesn't, right? And so that's where my research sits. And we were also talking about how with, even if, so for example, like that the survey that I was just talking about in that research, they tweeted out to 60,000 people, only ended up with 273 respondents with real results. So even as we think about capturing information from all of Army, we're never going to have that full picture. So even if we had numbers, even if we got 20,000 respondents to a survey, we're never going to have a full picture, because that's going to be the 20,000 respondents that saw it wherever it was posted, that probably have some linkage to the people posting it, right? So it's always going to get caught up in these slices of where the researcher sits or whoever's sharing the survey and so on. Things can get propagated out, but it's never going to be enough for it to really capture all of Army.
Yeah, the problem, I have a bone to pick with quantitative data as well, because quantitative data, this happens with a lot of data, it can not represent the entirety of a community. Seeing quantitative data as entirely neutral or unbiased is so incorrect, because who's collecting the data and who is responding?
And who wrote the questions? I also have a bigger like picture, like I get this all the time when I'm submitting my research to journals and conferences and stuff, is how can you prove to me that the work you're doing isn't biased? And I'm like, how can you prove to me survey X over there isn't biased? Like, you're not asking them that question, because there's an inherent bias within research to assume that quantitative means neutral, which I'm hoping by 2024 we can agree that's just incorrect. It's just like saying, oh, the AI is doing it, so it must be neutral. It's no. Whoever built that system, whatever data set it was trained on, that all built bias into that system. And the same goes for a survey. The same goes for counting things. Who's deciding what we're counting? How do we decide what we're counting? Oh, I have a wonderful example. So when I was doing the census, the Army Census project, where we had basically a very simple survey, and it had to be simple because we were translating it into multiple languages. One of the biggest pieces of pushback we got was, how come you didn't include two categories of things that I thought was really interesting? One, people really wanted to be able to count race. So they wanted to be able to get numbers on race and ethnicity for Army. And two, they wanted to be able to count disability. And those two survey questions we ended up not including, because how do you count those things? Like, if you are an American citizen and you're used to filling out your census data about, yes, I'm white/Caucasian, or I'm mixed, or whatever it is, you have those check boxes you're used to. Those do not translate to other countries. How we count what race and ethnicity is different from country to country, from culture to culture. There's no way for us as an Army project to be able to make that translational work across the globe. There's no way to not make that bias. It's a social impossibility because there's just no way we would be able to get anything that looks correct. And the same goes with disability. How do we count what disability is? How do we know if somebody's disabled? How do we translate that onto a survey that's going out to a bunch of people that aren't reading anything in detail? They're just checking boxes, right? And so how do you do that translation work? It's just really hard to do. And you really have to go culture by culture, country by country, and that is expensive. That's just not, for a fan project, that's just not going to happen. And I have a bigger bone to pick since we're sitting here talking about this. The folks that really wanted that data, I want to know why you want that data. Why do you want to know how many Army are disabled? Why do you really need to know how many Black Army are there? I get there's a curiosity, there's an interest there, but once that data is out in the world, once we have put it on a website and said, yes, X percentage of Army are disabled, who else is going to use that information? Where else is that going to go? Who is going to write some article in the future about Army and pull up some random ideas and drop that percentage into their article? The amount of harm I could see happening from this is actually far greater than I think we would get any benefit out of having these fun numbers. Say, oh yes, we have 20% disabled Army. Funny how it matches the rest of the globe. Like, why can't we just go with that? And anyway,
I don't know. I feel like with that conversation, it's people just want the numbers so they can say what they want to say for their side. Because I feel, especially with race, what would happen is, okay, let's make it clear. Number one, you guys already did it by country. And when you did it by country, there was a lot of people from Mexico because there was a popular K-pop YouTuber who promoted the survey. Like a Mexican K-pop YouTuber who did that. That itself would have shown the data in a particular way.
Yeah.
That maybe some people would have liked and some people would have not liked. And I think that's just discourse we don't need.
Right.
It's meaningless discourse. Because with the fandom, with how large the fandom is, I don't care if someone's part of a quote-unquote minority or majority group. What matters is their voice and what they say and their experiences. Because I could see people using the survey data, if it was of race, and going, oh, you don't represent a large part of Army, so I don't have to listen to you.
Yeah.
That's exactly what would happen. We're just imagining right now, but that is exactly what would happen, because we already see people who use that fan project's data when it comes to talking about the gender of Army, right? Yeah. Majority female, and people point to the survey.
Yeah.
And that's a positive thing. But also, things can skew negatively really fast.
Right. I feel like without context and without having qualitative data to surround it, you really lose a lot of the meaning. And yes, and then it's really easy. It's a whole thing of like how to lie with statistics. It's really easy to take something out of context, plop it in your writing or plop it in your argument, and do something negative with it. And we're seeing that even with quotes and stuff, and even with people's tweets, we're seeing how misinformation, disinformation is being passed around in Army right now. We're seeing how people are like cutting screenshots a certain way. We're seeing how this information flows and how giving people more fodder for that is not something I'm particularly keen to do.
Yeah, and even though Army itself is a really big fandom, the same problem happens in smaller fandoms who attempt to do censuses and do surveys as well. Because beyond just like the Army fan project, there's actual academic IRB work from other academics who have tried to do surveys and censuses of fandoms. And even those do not capture the entirety of a fandom because fandoms themselves are just inherently so diverse and have so many different types of people involved in the space. And also, because fandoms are so big, there's people involved in different spaces within one fandom. There's like whole sides, even just on Army Twitter, that don't see each other. There's a thriving fan fiction side that's just doing their own thing. And they don't see any of the streamer, funder, whatever discourse is going on.
Yeah.
And they don't care either.
No, they don't. They don't. I'll say it. Said it in another episode anyway. I have a whole fanfic account that lives separately from the rest of me. It lives very happily. And I love going over onto that timeline because things are happier there. There's almost no crossover whatsoever between those two communities. But they're still Army. They're still talking about being.
And that's literally a true representation of why it is so difficult to do any type of quantifying of the fandom. Kate talked about this too. If you released a survey, the people who are going to do that survey are most likely your followers. And that survey may not get to that other side of Army, even on Twitter. It may not get over there. Maybe some people see it, be like, oh, that's interesting, cool. I'm gonna move on with my day. And then there's gonna be some people who are like, we all have to do this, we all have to take it, we all have to participate, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't connect. And I think especially what's happening with Palestine right now, we're seeing this too, where there's an entire group of armies who are deluding themselves into thinking that it's okay to be Zionist or Zionist compliant. It's okay to not boycott because this is my space, right? But it's okay if I'm also in that space and I don't like how you guys are acting, I can just go to a different space. Those people are not the rulers of Army Twitter. We talked about.
They sure seem to feel like they are, though. It's interesting the way the discourse moves as if they are the only ones, which is not true at all. Do you think there's something interesting? Since we're talking about this, I think there has been historically, it hasn't obviously been as big of a thing recently because BTS are enlisted, but there has historically been this kind of like push to get more people to see your stuff so that BTS will see you. And if this fan project, if we push it far enough and fast enough and high enough, maybe BTS will log on and see it because it's trending or whatever. So I think there's also an interesting clout chasing thing going on with wanting validation from BTS, which I don't know, I feel like is also weird. Like I get it, but also I would actually rather not be perceived by them. So maybe that's a personal thing.
No, but I think that's a distinction between people who hold a lot of older fandom attitudes and then people who hold a lot of new stan attitudes, where a lot of times with people who I talk to who are like older fans or have been in fandom longer, I don't want to be noticed by anyone. But a lot of older fandom attitudes, this is why there's such a big disconnect around the conversation of fan fiction, because I don't want BTS reading my fan fiction.
Oh God, no.
No celebrity, no creators of a TV show or anything needs to read my fanfiction because that's for me and my community.
Yeah.
It's not for anyone else, literally. But stan culture is so focused on this idea of, oh, I want to be noticed. I want them to see me and to know who I am.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I could literally live my life and BTS could just never look my way and I would be fine. Because I am not a fan for the purpose of having BTS know who I am. I know who they are, and that's good enough.
And it's interesting, it goes back to this idea of the flat army space, in that I have said this from the beginning. I said this when I was like still like playing around on TikTok, but it was like, if I just reached one member of my community and impacted one person in my community space, then I feel like I've done enough. Like that's good enough for me. And when I say that, I'm talking about things like educational content and just the kind of intervention, like how do we make the world a better place kind of content. If I just reach one person, then I feel like I've done enough. And especially as my account got bigger, like there is a sort of discomfort in knowing I don't know who all is perceiving me. I never aspired to be like a big account. Like I just never, that was nothing, not something that I was ever interested in. And especially the way things have gone recently, I'm certainly not interested in being perceived in ways that I can't even see how I'm being perceived, because things are getting screenshotted and shared around on places that I'm blocked from that I can't even, I don't have any control over my own narrative, which is like really uncomfortable for me. So I can't imagine what it might be like for a celebrity. Anyway, that's a meta commentary, but I think there's like something interesting in unpacking some of the motivations behind someone's account, right? So like my motivations were, I would like to reach people, but I'm not necessarily aspiring to reach tons and tons of people. I'm just aspiring to make ripples or waves in a space that hopefully eventually build and can change the world for better. But also for me, I'm like, I want to be with my community and my small group of friends. I don't necessarily need to be clout chasing. I don't need to be validated in the way that like BTS is sharing my stuff up on their Instagram or whatever. I don't need that in my life. And I'm happy for the people that it's happened to that found that a positive experience. I don't know if anybody has actually found that a positive experience, because it tends to come with a lot of baggage, army baggage. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's like an interesting I guess this is like a research question for me of what the people who have tens of thousands of followers, what are they getting out of this experience, and have their motivations changed now that they have tens of thousands of followers? Guess we'll never know.
I think this kind of goes back to the fan account versus personal account conversation. Because I remember like a couple years ago, there was one big account particularly who had a breakdown on the TL about people pressuring them to just be a fan account instead of a personal account. And they were talking about, oh, and I have a whole separate account to talk about things I'm actually interested and care about. They're still with BTS, right? But they like other things too.
Right.
And they're like, and I could never post about that on this account because people will just hate me and jump me. And I thought that was so interesting because yeah, it is really sad that at a certain point when you're a big account, people even say this like when big accounts want to close their account or want to go inactive. They're like, oh, give your account to someone else so they can use the following you have. People say that about BTS chart data all the time, how he closed his account. And people are like, he should have given his account to someone.
I would need to unpack that for a while, because yeah, what is this? What are we doing here? I feel like we've just out capitalismed ourselves or something. I don't know. It feels really weird to me.
Because if I followed someone and their ownership changed, I don't want to follow that account anymore. That's not the same person anymore. But Army sees it so transactionally. They don't see your quote unquote fan account as you as the person. They see the numbers and then your opinions, and it's okay, I'm commodifying that now. Because I think it's really sad, honestly, because I think it totally destroys the purpose of fandom, which is to build community and to build each other.
Right.
And it feels so anti-fandom in the sense that it's against what fandom itself is meant to be. Like, we're meant to create something here. We're meant to create community, because creating a fandom itself existing is such a radical act. Because in a world that focus so much on hyper individualism, gathering together around something, even something that's not where you live, it's not your religion, it's not any type of physical community space, but it's like online community space with people that you meet from all different backgrounds. Having that exist is such a radical act in a world that doesn't want you to build community.
And to do it playfully. See, this is the thing where this is hello to my research agenda, but this is the thing, is play as a subversive act, as a radical act of changing the world and building community. And I think that these are spaces that have been historically discounted. The fandoms are the butt of jokes. They're scorned by the general population. This kind of, the over commoditization, the dehumanization of fandom community members, turning them into just accounts with numbers on them, turning them into how big is your reach. I think all of this feeds into the idea that it de-fandomizes us. For me, I keep thinking about, oh, we're rooted in play, we're rooted in these acts of joy. And that in and of itself is subversion, is radical, right? And I think that for those of us who have been like trying to find our way, especially recently with kind of the schism between the different communities, I think that it's been really meaningful for me to see those acts of community still thriving, the play, the joyfulness, to like leaning into finding community again after a lot of us lost a lot of friends. And I just think there's something really interesting and beautiful about finding that joy and using and leveraging that play as like a subversive radical act in the world, and just existing like that is meaningful.
Yeah, and we're talking about like how communities form and especially how they're organized under play. We can talk more generally about how Army itself is organized. Fandoms in general are usually not that united. They are usually not that organized. They'll organize together every once in a while to make a zine, to make a shipping week event, to host a convention, but generally not that organized. Usually friend groups kicking back, doing their thing. A lot of times people describe fandom as very cliquey, which is true because a lot of times fandom is just a bunch of different friend groups hanging out. But in Army is really organized. And I wrote this when I was 16. I wrote a video essay about fandom structure and why K-pop fandoms, especially Army, are different. And I talked about how with K-pop fandoms, usually fandoms, they start from scratch, right? Think like a TV show fandom. Okay, TV show fandom, TV show comes out. People then have to find each other in order to gather. And with K-pop fandoms, they don't start with that loose structure. They go straight to having structure already because a lot of K-pop fandoms, the group debuts, right? And the first thing they have to do, vote, stream, and buy. Because they have to get that music show award, right? So K-pop fandoms, when they manifest themselves already, when they come into existence, they already have structure. And because of that, K-pop fandoms get to exist with that structure and gather around a common goal. A lot of times that goal is about uplifting and supporting their K-pop group. But in this video essay, I also talked about how K-pop fandoms, they face a lot of pressures, and because they face those pressures, that reinforces the common goal that they are under. So for Army, there's a lot of reinforcement throughout the years that people retell stories, right? Break wings, what happened in 2018 with the Jimin's t-shirt, what happened in 2020 with the Grammys. People keep retelling these things in order to reinforce the common goal of supporting BTS. But we used to have a common goal. At least I imagine a large part of the fandom used to have a common goal. And that goal was around supporting BTS. So we need to support BTS in order to make them untouchable, basically, in their fame and their success, so they can create whatever art they want to create, right? But now I feel like post chapter 2, we had these conversations at the beginning of this podcast season 2. Our goals are changing. And now, as a larger collective, we're confused on what the goal is.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the goal now is to take BTS's music and take their messages and actually manifest those and actualize those messages of liberation, of equality, of justice. And because Army quite literally is adorable representative MC for the youth.
Yeah.
So we're already adorable, number one.
Yeah. Got that covered.
But number two, how do we become representatives for the youth? How do we become representatives for change? We have to start somewhere. So we start at BTS's music. We start at BTS. We love BTS. They inspire us. And we then diverge from just BTS to then, okay, we helped BTS and we changed BTS's world. How do we now change the world?
Yeah.
It's about expanding what we believe in our reach. Because we're already an organized group of people. How do we use that to help people?
Exactly.
But people are still confused on what the common goal is. People are still stuck in the idea, oh, if we don't buy this album, BTS are going to go broke. And BTS won't be able to house themselves or live and be happy. Which is so... There's layers here. Okay, number one, do you think BTS are like snobby, materialistic people?
Not the last time I checked.
Because number one, I don't think BTS, number one, are financially irresponsible, especially with how wealthy they are right now. But even if there was a decline in the amount of money that was going into their pocket, they wouldn't suddenly be unable to take care of themselves as people. They're like, the assumption that BTS don't have this independence and autonomy over their lives, where there's this assumption that BTS cannot take care of themselves, that ARMY takes care of them. When ARMY does, in a lot of ways, ARMY cares about BTS, ARMY supports BTS, but also BTS themselves are their own people.
There's just something so patronizing and racist. I'm just gonna say it about that whole narrative of, and it's deeply ironic because like when I suggested in a tweet that perhaps BTS don't need us monetarily anymore, I was the one that got called racist. So I just think there's just like something deeply interesting about that whole narrative. But yeah, I think that it's assuming that BTS, being millionaires, still need us to keep a roof over their heads is deeply patronizing and pretty racist.
Yeah, and it's also like a reinforcement. Again, I talked about how the common goal used to be like solely supporting BTS. And a lot of that got reinforced with how a lot of, especially pro-Zionist and pro-Zionist compliant accounts, they retell these imagined narratives of what BTS went through in their struggles. When BTS did struggle, and BTS did go through a lot of just unnecessary pushback from both the Korean industry, both the global music industry, the American music industry. They got pushback from so many different people. They've experienced racism from so many different people, and they've experienced like hatred and death threats and so much just unnecessary BS from the world. And that all is so valid. But do you really think they don't have their own control as people to deal with those things? You are not their saviors.
Right.
You are not somehow the only people who can help them. Because they can help themselves. They are capable of helping themselves. Namjoon himself, after talking on We Live about like the Frank Ocean song, he could speak up for himself. He's capable of doing that. The BTS members are capable of expressing their own wants and needs as people. Jin does it frequently. He says no to things people say on live streams. He says no to things people say in interviews. And it's so interesting because it's like these people are simultaneously arguing that they're giving BTS autonomy by giving them support and money monetarily, when they're also saying BTS also depend on me and they can't do anything for themselves.
Right.
And I think because of that disconnect, people aren't understanding the HYBE boycott at all.
Exactly.
The boycott is affecting HYBE and it does affect BTS. But BTS aren't gonna not be able to live their lives because we're not giving them money. By the way, all the boycotting, it could be a forever thing, but it is not meant to be a forever thing. Because I can imagine a future where Scooter Braun is no longer part of HYBE and there's clear support for Palestine from BTS. I can imagine that future. If that's not the future, then that means I change as a person. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But like the way people are like, okay, I'm not going to do anything because no one's told me to do anything because I don't think the boycott is working. It's like, how is anything supposed to work if you don't believe in change, in what is possible? Anyway, that was a lot. That was a lot for this episode.
I think it's all like super valid stuff, right? I think that's a really interesting and important point where you say we can imagine a future where Scooter Braun's no longer in the picture and BTS have spoken up, or some manifestation of like an iteration of some that kind of future, right? I would not be in this fandom if I didn't believe in that future, because what would I even be doing here if I didn't believe that was something that would become true? And it would be a lot easier to boycott if I just didn't care and just was no longer engaged. But obviously I'm engaged. Obviously I'm imagining a future where good things have happened and Scooter Braun is somewhere cozy like jail, and we can just live our lives and go back to having an inclusive, happy fandom where we can actually all talk about the music together and stuff. But like the fact that we aren't there yet is the part that's distressing, right? But again, this is like one of those things. Look at history, look at other boycott movements. The people who are boycotting Hybe right now are doing out of love for their artists. And anyone who doesn't see that is disconnected from why they're in a fandom.
Definitely. It goes to show that ARMY as a fandom. Okay, hold on. Actually, I want to talk about this. I actually had tweeted something a couple of days ago about how a lot of Zionists and Zionist complicit armies, they keep saying pro-Palestinian armies are making BTS look bad.
Oh, yeah.
When really, I think what's leagues worse is people having to write in history books that as a genocide was being live streamed to our faces, ARMY stood by and did nothing.
Yeah.
That makes us look infinitely worse than if we're doing something now, even if the group of people doing that is not the majority.
Yeah.
Anyway, any final thoughts, Kate, for this episode?
Woo! Obviously this conversation, I don't know, there's a lot going on here, and I feel like there's a lot more to unpack. Obviously I'm literally dedicating like a whole arm of my research to unpacking this, so stay tuned. But I think there's like something to be said about, as the listeners are in their own communities and thinking about their own voices and how to use them, I think that there's something to be said in, if you're feeling alone or you're feeling like you're not being heard, then I think one should take comfort in the fact that there are a lot more people out there using their voices and a lot more people adding themselves to the waves of this movement than it feels like. I think somebody asked me the other day, oh, this pro-Palestine stuff, this is such a small subgroup of the larger ARMY community. And I was like, is that true though? Is it really that small? Because I have hundreds of people on my timeline that are supporting this. And that's hundreds of people just that I see daily. And so I think that your own worldview might be somewhat small. It might be hard to see outside the walls of your own little community, but I feel like we are part of a much larger global movement. And again, I think that just because we aren't some big 150K account pushing whatever agenda, I think that we still matter and our community still matters. And I feel like even if you don't feel it yet, you are a part of something bigger that is happening, and to just hold on to that and know that it's hard right now, it sucks right now, but I do believe that the future is going to be better.
Yeah. This happens all the time with activism and advocacy. You think that you are such a small group, but are you? Even before the civil rights movement, Black people were standing up in so many different types of ways. They were trying to accumulate wealth. That's the reason why things like Black Wall Street existed. They were trying to own land so that way they can continue accumulating wealth. They were trying to create and invent things so that way they can have autonomy over their bodies and their hair. and who they are as people. And all of that, a lot of those people imagined and dreamed of futures that we have now. And right now, it may be hard to dream and imagine a future where there's no two-state solution, where Palestine is actually liberated and existing and the Zionist project is dismantled. But we can, and we should try to. Because the people who are trying to prevent us from doing that and from actually actualizing a liberated Palestine, I wonder who they are and what they believe. That's so interesting. Anyway, have a wonderful day, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I'm glad to have this conversation, as always, with my co-host, Kate, Dr. Kate, by the way. Did you guys know female professors are less likely to be called doctor by their students? Anyway.
It's true. I almost never get called that unless I explicitly ask.
Exactly.
Which now I do, by the way, in my undergrad classes.
Call your female professors doctor today.
Yeah.
Anyway, have a wonderful day, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Take care of yourselves and keep imagining a better future. Don't crush the hope. Don't crush the dreams, because you are sowing the seeds of revolution and they are blossoming and growing.
Yes.
There you go. All right. That is all. Bye.
Bye.